Hi, welcome to another Austin Software Co-operatives Meetup. This is our August 2021 book review. We're going to be going over Michael J. Sandel's Justice and going into how different things can apply and fairness in our government and smaller groups and organizations, and how that ties into a lot of other thoughts on how people can do that. Watson?
Thanks. All right. We've got the mind map here. I think I shared it. I'm going to share it again. Chat. Let's see if I can get this going. Here we go. One more time. You should be able to see it in the chat. All right. So if it's your first time joining, normally this is a book review. Like Taylor said, Michael Sandel Justice. We normally review books that could be applied to cooperatives or software cooperatives and try to critique them and take some of the principles and see what we can do with them. This book, Michael Sandel, he is a professor of ethics at Harvard, somewhat of a rock star over there. Here, I think my audio went out. You guys still hear me?
I can hear you now. It did go out for about 10 seconds.
Oh, wow. Okay.
5 to 10 seconds, yeah.
All right. Yeah, so I was saying Michael Sandel is a professor at Harvard, and he is the professor of ethics there. So he's a pretty knowledgeable on the subject of ethics. We try to take the books that have to do with anything that could deal with fairness or business or what have you, and try to apply them to the cooperatives. So let's jump right in here. We've got the first chapter here called "Do the Right Thing." It's an introduction to the book. And before I get into it, if anybody had any first impressions of the book, whether you read it or not, or looked at it, skimmed it, or whatever, let me know at this point. Does anybody have any first impressions they wanted to share?
I enjoyed it. I guess it was, like right in line with searching for the truth and understanding like all these different paths that you could take, and how the thoughts from different things like utilitarianism and libertarianism can bring you down a different path for how you see the world, and how that applies to like the rules and different things that go on in politics. So I found it interesting, and some things are like, yeah, I agree. And they'll be like, oh, that's a little different. So that's my take.
Yep. Anyone else? Okay. So the first thing that kind of jumps out at you when trying to think about anything to do with fairness, ethics, justice, so on and so forth, is people first, in my experience, people think, okay, well, it's in the eye of the beholder, it's all relative, and that kind of thing. So, and so why even bother? And if you watch any of Michael Sandel's videos on YouTube, he has a bunch of his classes up there with a big auditorium at Harvard just assigned to him with like 1,000 students in it or something. That's one of the things he goes over in the very beginning. He does that in this chapter. It's kind of a thing where when he describes the whole project of doing or thinking about or reasoning about ethics, it's a dialectic. So you move back and forth. Let me make this a bit bigger here. So you move back and forth between judgments within a concrete situation, and then you try to extrapolate the principles, right? And then those principles would be your ethics, right? And it kind of follows this pattern, right? You encounter a hard moral question, and you start with a conviction about what's the right thing to do. You reflect on the reason for your conviction, and then you seek a principle behind it, and you go on about your merry way, and then you find a new situation that confounds the principle, and then you experience some confusion, and then you end up having receiving some type of pressure to try to sort out the confusion in your principle, and then that's really ethical philosophy. That's when you get pushed into trying to reason about these things. And then if my mic goes out, I don't know why it seems to be going in and out. Just let me know. All right. All right. So one way to delineate ethics in general is you can separate one style or set of principles and put them in under the umbrella of consequentialism, right? So you're only concerned with the consequences of an action, and then you decide if it's ethical or not. And then there's another kind where it's not based off the consequences, it's based off of maybe your pathway, how you're behaving regardless of the consequences. And a fancy word for that is deontological. But I don't have that here. So, all right. This is what we care about. Try to point out things that apply to cooperatives and fairness in general. Distributive justice is something that we're concerned with, how things get distributed, goods, so on and so forth. And here's a quote here. So to ask whether society is just is to ask how it distributes the things that we prize: income and wealth, duties and rights, powers and opportunities, offices and honors. A just society distributes these goods in the right way. It gives each person his or her due. The hard questions begin when we ask what people are due and why. And you can say, this is a preview of what we're going to go over. There's really three ways to distribute goods: through welfare of the most people, freedom, and virtue. That's the three categories we're going to try to get through really quickly in an hour. Okay. Any questions so far? All right. We are going to try to blast through. Jeremy Bentham is the person credited with what's called utilitarianism. Main idea is the highest principle of morality is to maximize happiness and the overall balance of pleasure over pain. Right? Okay. This is something that people, when you're just sitting around in the armchair reasoning about fairness and on what have you, a lot of times people land here and at utilitarianism. One of the weaknesses is it fails to respect individual rights by caring only about the sum of satisfactions. It can run roughshod over individual people. All right. I'm going to go over this quickly. Utilitarianism, everyone's preferences count equally. So another problem is all values can't be captured by a common currency of value. And an example of that would be, let's see here. Let's leave that. I think I have an example later on and we'll bring it up. So when we get to, yeah, I think I have an example of that. So that's Jeremy Bentham. He's pure count, a calculus, count everything up. And if everybody, if it's a maximum situation where people receive the maximum amount of pleasure, that's what is moral. And that's what you should do. Now we have Jon Stewart Mill. That name might be more familiar. He's very influential in the US Constitution. He tried to reconcile individual rights with utilitarian philosophy. Basically, the whole idea of rights versus utilitarianism, you may not arrive at something like free speech if you try to engage in a pure utilitarian, let's say, voting system of a bunch of people. Jon Stewart Mill tried to come up with some of these basic rights and then tried to reason about them and say, well, if people were in their right mind, they would come up with these rights. So we should just start out with these rights. Free speech, freedom of religion, freedom of being able to assemble, and a bunch of other those things, right? Representation, that type of thing. And so he's the one that really kind of, it's something much more widely applied. So I'm going to leave it there. Does anybody have any questions about this so far? All right, let us move forward. Keep that in mind. You have utilitarianism. And one thing within this pathway, we're going to go utilitarianism, libertarianism. I'm going to talk a bit about markets. We're going to make our way over to the freedom. Let me move this, actually. We'll leave it there. We'll move this. We're going to make it over to the freedom philosophers, and then Aristotle. Let's go to libertarianism. The idea that justice means respecting freedom in an individual, respecting freedom of an individual's rights is at least as familiar in contemporary politics as the utilitarian idea of maximizing welfare. So the common, if you've ever heard of the libertarians, you might have all these connotations of them, but it really just means maximizing individual rights from the philosophers that kind of tried to coin. Jon Stewart Mill is also a big influencer on libertarianism. So one of the things is, so we're talking about distributing goods. In utilitarianism, you could do a distribution of wealth per se. If everybody won out. So let's say the example would be Bill Gates. You could take $1 million from Bill Gates. His utility, his pleasure paying from $1 million would be really, really insignificant to him. You could distribute it $10,000 to 100 people, and they're 100 people who were poor, let's say, and their pleasure and happiness would significantly increase from $10,000 And so that would be an argument for redistribution of wealth. And utilitarians, you can make an argument that, oh, then, well, that's fine. We're fine with that. Libertarians would say no, because you are violating someone's rights. So this goes down to the rights premise, right? So you have people like Friedrich Hayek. You have, I don't have them on here, but there's other people like Nozick and others, Milton Friedman, very influential in economics in the United States, where they say, okay, we shouldn't violate people's individual rights, specifically their property rights. Okay. So here we go. The moral crux of the libertarian claim is the idea of self-ownership. If I own myself, I must own my labor. But if I own my labor, I must be entitled to the fruits of my labor. So this is an argument that people that take my stuff are basically making me a slave. If you can take what I'm doing, it's basically you own my hours. Therefore, I'm a slave to you. So there's that. As long as, and their argument is, as long as the distribution of goods was accumulated or distributed based off of, well, as long as it's not received or acquired by theft, someone stealing it from another person, or coercion, then it's fine. Right. So there's that. Any questions about libertarianism and distributive justice in the context of libertarianism? All right. We've got a couple more to go. This is kind of one of Michael Sandel's specialties, is talking about markets and trying to critique them. So, because in our society, we try to solve problems first by default with a market, right? The case for free markets, libertarian case, letting people engage in voluntary exchanges respects their freedom. Laws that interfere with the free market violate individual liberty. Utilitarian case for markets, free markets promote the general welfare. When two people make a deal, both gain, as long as their deal makes them better off without hurting anyone else. It must increase overall utility, so they are fine with it. Okay, so that's arguments for distributing things with a free market. One critique that I found convincing is the Civil War draft system. The Civil War draft system, you could buy your way out of it. So when I say Civil War draft, everybody had to fight in the United States in the Civil War. You got drafted and you were going to fight. And there's a good chance you were going to die. Well, rich people like Carnegie, they were able to buy someone to replace them in the draft. So the Civil War draft system, you could say that it's unfair because it let the affluent hire other people to fight in their place. Argument that, why is that unfair? Well, they're saying military service in this situation is a civic obligation, right? So if it's a civic duty, it's wrong to put it up for sale on the market. It's the underlying argument is that it's based on, there's a purpose for your for you being a citizen, a reason behind it. And if you use money, you put it on a market, you corrupt it. That reasoning. Let's see here. There's other arguments against free market. So basically, we can only exercise free choice if we're not unduly pressured by the need for money for instance, and only if we're reasonably informed about the alternatives. So this basically is saying also that if you're just poor and you don't have the ability to opt out of, purchase someone to fight for you, then that's also really not a choice. You're really being coerced into doing it. So. Any questions so far on this portion
I
or
guess
comments?
more of a comment, yeah.
Mhm.
Based on some of the other resources around cooperatives that you shared with me earlier. So I
Mhm.
guess what this is saying is like, so under libertarianism, you know, if you own yourself, you own your labor, and the market allows you to exchange that labor for something else that is valuable to you. But around, I think where to me cooperatives become relevant is if you don't really understand the value of your labor, or I guess the added value of that your labor puts into some materials on the market. And I guess that's what that last paragraph is saying, is you have to be informed in order to really to not be exploited in that market transaction. Is that, am I
I
like?
like that argument. I like that when there seems to be, when you're talking about cooperatives and you're talking about exploitation and you're talking about the employer-employee relationship and how employees get exploited, there's an incentive for an employer to try to keep the employee uninformed. Many different examples of this. For instance, like with just intuition, say a law firm. It's interesting that lawyers always choose partnerships. They don't choose corporate structure for their law firm. So why is that? That's interesting. Other things would be, as far to address what you're saying specifically. If you're talking about, hey, the widgets are being sold, it costs $5 to make the widget, paying everybody. We're selling it, for $10. That's a $5 profit. We're not even going to tell you that, right? So you don't even know to even ask for more pay. You don't even know your productivity. So to try to use what you were using as an argument, yeah, they're uninformed. They can't make an informed decision on how to even negotiate. And that's a reoccurring theme, is to keep the employer in the employer-employee relationship, to keep the employee in a place where they cannot negotiate through many different means, one of them being uninformed. So yeah, I agree with what you're saying. Anyone else? Or go ahead if you had another comment.
No, I'm good. I guess at that point, by actively trying to suppress, employees getting that information, employers are violating the non-aggression principle on purpose, right?
Not non-aggression, which I'm forgetting what this principle, non-aggression or non-affected. Go ahead.
I suppose just to my understanding, I'm not too well versed on this subject either, is basically that under libertarianism, you're not supposed to threaten or to cause any, harm on others to exercise their rights and I suppose their place in the market.
Oh, that's interesting. So, some type of threat, you're saying, maybe, as far
It
as
sounds like
aggression?
it's talking about I guess it's when people are saying that libertarianism can go too far or whatever, and how do you deal with like community or how do you deal with the social aspect?
Mhm.
And you have a stop with not supposed to infringe on other people's liberty. So you're supposed to balance out at least the idea of it. Was that what you were talking about?
Yeah, I think you put it in better words, right? So I have the rights to everything that I own, and I can do anything with that as long as I don't infringe on other people's rights on what they own. So by an employer, preventing me from being informed about what I own, they're infringing on my right in a way.
Yeah, I think you would do that. There's another argument. I think it's David Ellerman. He says because you were part in the production process, whatever it is, the widget, just that alone allows you to have some rights to the fruit of your labor. So it's very strange that you don't have any rights to say where the surplus goes, where the profit goes, and so on and so forth. So you could look at that as a libertarian argument. I don't know any libertarians that would like that argument though, but the libertarians tend to be contractarians. So contractarians are people who say if you signed it, oh well, you freely did it, and they tend to diminish the the idea of the knowledge of your contract. So it's on your.
We've lost your audio, Watson. It's completely gone.
You guys hear me from my phone?
I can hear you. Sounds
Yeah,
good.
I'm getting off of I'm gonna mute my computer. I think it's a weird connection with my microphone. So it's utilitarians tend to diminish the concept of the knowledge of the contract. It's your fault if you didn't read the contract, that kind of thing. So if you signed it, oh well. So yeah. Anything else? All right. I'm glad I logged in with my phone. Let's see here. So let's close this. We're making good time. All right. We're getting into the heavy hitters now. Immanuel Kant. So we've gone over utilitarian, which is do a calculus of pleasure and pain and then figure out how to distribute stuff. So within cooperatives, we care about how we kind of have a strong opinion on how things are distributed. And that's why it's relevant. Libertarians, they're contractarians, and they're about freedom and personal rights of freedom. And as long as you sign the contract, then they're fine with it. Immanuel Kant is also about freedom, but in a different way. And he is notorious for being very, very difficult to read. But I think Michael Sandel does a good job of distilling him. So we're talking about morality and we're talking about ethics. Only actions done out of the motive of duty have moral worth. So remember, we're talking about consequentialism. We're talking about caring about the consequences. You've heard the phrase probably, the ends justifies the means. Immanuel Kant says, no, the ends do not justify the means. There are certain things that it doesn't matter what happens in the end because your pathway for getting there is broken. And when you are concerned about that, that's called deontologicalism. Fancy word for saying that the ends do not justify the means. Okay, and we'll talk about that some more. But any questions so far before we get into it? All right. I'm going to try to hit the most important parts of the Immanuel Kant. All right. One of the first things to understand about this view of ethics, and this is he's very influential as far as when it comes to ethics and philosophy, there is before Kant and after Kant. He is that influential as far as ethics and other forms of philosophy as well. One of the things when we're talking about ethics, and I'm going to try to summarize this thing, see if I can do that. He says that he puts let me just go down and do like Michael Sandel. So if we act out of some motive other than duty, such as self-interest, for example, our action lacks moral worth, right? Duty and autonomy, okay? Autonomy is you have the ability to do what you want, right? So duty, it seems like a paradox to talk about duty. That seems like something you have to do. And then autonomy is do what you want. Well, for Immanuel Kant, they go together in a special case when I am the author of the law that I have the duty to obey. My dignity as a free person does not consist in being subject to the moral law, but in being the author of the law. That's how you subordinate. I don't have it in here. I don't know why, but there's a story from Kant of the shopkeeper, right? So the shopkeeper, you could say they have the ability to give the correct change or not. They could give improper change or wrong change and short change kids, and the kids won't know. If the shopkeeper says, I'm going to give the correct change because I might get caught, so I'm going to give the correct change, that would be perfectly fine with utilitarians. Like, well, yeah, it's everybody maximizes because you're going to go to prison or whatever. And that's why you do it, fine. Immanuel Kant says, no, you gave the correct change, but no, that was not moral. You didn't do something moral there. So it's strange there. His thing is you have to give the correct change because you reasoned about laws, rules, and all these things. And you said, giving the correct change is my duty. That's part of what I'm supposed to do as a shopkeeper. And I accept that. As a shopkeeper, I'm going to give the correct change. You do that. And then your actions are in accordance with that. Then you've done an action that has moral worth. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep. Hey, I think Jeff may have a question
Okay.
or comment.
I was just going to make a comment that the categorical imperative is very similar to the golden rule.
All right. You skipped down here, and I'm going to maximize this for you. This is for Jeff and everyone else because it seems like the golden rule to me too. Kant's categorical imperative tells us to treat everyone with respect as an end in itself. Isn't this pretty much the same as the golden rule? No, the golden rule depends on contingent facts along how people would like to be treated. The categorical imperative requires us to abstract from such contingencies and respects persons as rational beings, regardless of what they might want in a particular situation. So this is starting to delve a bit more into Immanuel Kant's reasoning and his philosophy. So there's a subtle, I don't want to say game, but there's a subtle line of reasoning that he has. where it's the basis of the ethics. He's saying that rational, there's a special meaning behind the word rational and rational beings. Just the ability to be able, it's kind of reflexive. We find it within philosophy, anything that references itself. Programmers, we like recursion. We like things that reference themselves. Philosophers like that too. Anything, rational beings have the ability to think about themselves, make rules for themselves, make rules that take the rules that are made into account, things like that. When, by virtue of being rational, the capability of even making an ethical rule, like what we said about with the shopkeeper, the capability of being able to do that is special and requires dignity. And that capability, rationality in general, when you're in that mode, you can't think about what someone individually wants. It's kind of some type of it's a completely different mode, right? So it's rational thinking in general, and the categorical imperative is in general. It's a category. It's all cases, so it's a universalizable rule. So yeah, I don't know if that answers.
So, I don't want to slow this down, but I mean, so the way it's been a long time. I actually was a philosophy major back in the 1970s, and I remember Kant's the way I learned the categorical imperative is it's act only upon that maxim through which you can will at the same time that it should become oh, there it is. Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Right. So if you're willing that it should become universal law, it's because I know what you're saying, that you're being rational, but doesn't the golden rule imply that too? I mean, because it's part of it's biblical. It's got that religious thing in it, but it's the same idea that when you say that do unto others as you would have them do unto you.
Mm-hmm.
Well, so I guess I'm a little confused, but this is important.
Let's do it.
To me. Yeah,
it's important. Let's do it. Let's talk about it. So when we say do unto others as you do unto you, right? Okay, well, I like my back rubbed or something. I don't like people touching me. So let's do the opposite. I don't like my back rubbed. So nobody rubs backs. Go ahead.
If I'm a Kantian kind of person,
mm-hmm.
I would only want people to do unto me things that should be done to everybody.
Every rational being, but yeah. So here's I think this might address some of reason. So the reason we must respect the dignity of persons has nothing to do with anything particular about them. Remember, the particular is what the author Michael Sandel is saying is the difference between golden rule and the categorical imperative. It has nothing to do with anything particular about them. Kant's respect is unlike love, it's unlike sympathy, it's not like solidarity or fellowship. The reasons for caring about other people have to do with who they are in particular. Those reasons are having to do with who they are in particular, but Kantian respect is respect for humanity as such, for a rational capacity that resides undifferentiated in all of us. That last part is the important part. A rational capacity that resides undifferentiated in all of us. So you have to strip away the particulars of individuals.
So he's saying we don't care about any other details. If you're a human, should be respected because they have the capability to be rational, and that's it. So now you don't care about any other properties that they have individually or groups or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Is that what he's saying?
Well, that's the why. That's the power. Why rational beings deserve dignity, according to Kant. But then, what goes inside of the content of the categorical imperative is what Jeff was asking. What goes inside of it? And that's the difference between that and the golden rule. The golden rule could say, if you like rubbing back or you like your back rubbed, then act like, rub other people's backs or whatever, right? No, you need to be actually thinking about what rational beings want, all of them, to simplify it. So, and he's saying that access to rationality is special. That's rationality. Let's go back. Let's see, how much do we have here? What we have, I did not put in here. Okay. Let me read some of these out. Kant's ideas, and this is kind of trying to, so we're at the point where we're trying to tease away. Kant has this idea of what he calls an inclination. You can't, if you want something to have moral worth, you can't make the decision purely based off of your particulars. So he calls an inclination. So if you prefer apples over oranges, that's an inclination for you. That's not anything to do with any moral decision or whatever. It can't be based purely off of that. You can have that in there, but it has to have the other stuff, the other reasoning. That's where the moral comes in. So his idea of reason, of practical reason, the kind involved in morality, is not instrumental reason, which is reason that has some type of use for yourself in order to obtain your, what Kant calls inclinations. You can call it preferences, desires, things that you've been socialized to want, all that. But pure practical reason, which legislates a priori. A priori means before the empirical, before the five senses, touch, smell, taste, all this stuff like that. And it's not consequential. So act only on a maximum whereby you can at the same time will be a universal law. And then when I act in accordance to the categorical imperative, I'm acting freely. For whenever I act according to a hypothetical imperative, I act for the sake of some interest or an end given outside of me. This end given outside of me is tricky. He's talking also about your preferences, your individual preferences. Like I said, you like apples over oranges, and you say, I'm going to make a moral rule that oranges are, illegal. No, you can't. That's not according, it won't be moral. You can do what you make a rule, but it won't be moral if you do that and choose it. So you have to do it based off of something that's universalizable. So it's tricky in that way. And one, here we go. So what is the categorical imperative? First is a universalizable rule. That's the first version of the categorical imperative. There's another version. The other version is something like this. What could possibly, you basically need to make your rule based off of something that has absolute value. What has absolute value? What's an end unto itself? Kant's answer, humanity. I say that man as a general, in general, every rational being, right? So we're including sentient aliens too. So every rational being exists as an end in himself, not merely as a means for arbitrary use by this or that will. They don't just have relative value, but if anything has value, they have an absolute value, an intrinsic value. All right, so all this stuff is all intertwined. So did we figure it out or no?
Could the golden rule be like fit with an example of a rule that you come out? So it's not equivalent to categorical imperative, and it's not like to the side. I don't think. It seems like it would be within. It would be an imperative that you could come up with and try to decide if that's the
Here's
right
another
way.
thing then. What Michael Sandel says, motive matters. Okay, that's the first premise. If you make a rule and the motive is your preference, then it's broken according to Kant. So golden rule allows for you to make rules based off of inclination, what Kant calls inclinations. So
Well,
you can have a golden, go ahead.
I don't know enough about the golden rule. This is really important. You know, in our cooperative Nova Web Development, we have 3 principles of unity. And actually, my buddy Kevin Cole came up with the middle one, which is we want to help build the world we want to live in. And I like to think of that as being another restatement of the golden rule. I mean, you know, this stuff in the religious realm, like, you know, the whole thing, love thy neighbor as you love thyself, right? So in other words, it is supposed to be universalizable to be good. It's not just I want my back rubbed. It's that I care about all of humanity.
Right.
I would have to, for me, I'd have to stretch the golden rule and say, when you're doing unto others as you like them to yourself, you're going to go, oh, if I don't think about their preferences, then why would they think about my preferences? So I need to think about them. And so I have to go to like, make the golden rule apply at some universal forever time. And now all of a sudden it disappeared. Like, I'm actually saying something else, not the golden rule anymore.
Well, I was going to say there's a book, and you know, we like strength finders in our cooperative, but the first book was called First Break All the Rules. It's managers, a bunch of Gallup polls aimed at managers, and you're trying to figure out who's the best manager. And one of the things that they decided was managers break the golden rule. What? Well, they break the golden rule. Yes, they don't treat people like how they want to, like the manager wants to be treated. They treat people how the people want to be treated. So what Taylor just said, they figure out how someone individually wants to be treated, and then they go the extra step. You could try to say behaving that way is universalizable, and try to bring that into a categorical imperative, but it would be really a backflip to try to say that that's a golden rule.
Earlier, I was just going to take a second to clarify. I thought that in the process of rule setting, if you are to set rules without considering others' preferences, then you're breaking the golden rule. So.
Yeah, well, only if you would want to be treated with your preferences in mind.
Truly, true.
Right? So
True.
If you're a wild man and you don't care about your own, and it's like, we will have everyone, this is the board, and everyone will be assimilated, no individuals. Well, golden rule works real well if you go to that extreme. So, okay, we're having fun here. Any more questions? Because we have one more. Go ahead.
If I can take a shot. So if we try to Kantianize the golden rule, could we say, do unto others what you think the general person would want?
You can.
Right?
I don't want that.
The thing is, you have to do the motive part of it. If you do what you just said and your motive is maximum utility, then you're utilitarian and don't like you no more. So,
I mean, if we said that the majority of people want their back rubbed, then I think Watt's still going to be unhappy.
Oh yeah, really. All right, let's go. We've got Immanuel Kant. That's hundreds of years ago. That's old school. Let's get to our buddy, John Rawls. John Rawls is probably the most important political philosopher of the past century, I would say. Most influential, let's just say. And he is a Kantian. And what he did was, there are problems with what Kant did. I didn't even bring him up. But what we kind of hit on it. It's hard to figure out a categorical imperative that don't upset people. Okay? John Rawls went a step further and said, okay, we're gonna take we're going to go back. We're going to take a categorical imperative and we're going to abstract it a bit more. And he made some new tools to help us so we don't lose our mind. First thing to John Rawls, and John Rawls we're talking the 70s when he's doing this, 60s and 70s. So this is recent. We're talking philosophy, anything that is that recent is like, and influential is notable. So no one deserves his greater natural capacity. No one merits a more favorable starting place in society. What does that mean? You were born with things. Do you deserve those things? You were born being able to throw 100 and I don't know what a fastball is, 105 mile an hour fastball a lot, often. You don't get tired. That's a natural gift, or you have some capacity to do that. You're born with that. Well, do you deserve that? At least the height and weight and everything else that will go to even allow you to even practice to be able to get that far. That's a natural capacity. Or do you deserve it? He's saying no. The natural distribution is neither just nor unjust, nor is it unjust that persons are born into a society at some particular position. These are simple, natural facts. What is just and unjust is the way the institutions deal with these facts. All right. Let's say a couple more, and then we're going to try to tease out. Rawls rejects moral desert as the basis for distributive justice. Okay, so this whole thing we're talking about is how we distribute things, and Rawls is very much preoccupied with distributive justice. Doesn't like moral desert. So as a basis. So my having the talents to enable me to compete more successfully than others is not entirely my own doing. That's one reason to reject. And then qualities that a society happen to value at any given time are also morally arbitrary. So the underlying rule is you cannot distribute things that are based off a rule that's arbitrary. That would be not just. You could say it's random, but that's all you can say. You can't say it's just, right? All right, according to Rawls. So let's try to speed up. So what does he have? Here's a tool. It's called the original position. It's basically, imagine yourself with no properties. You're not a male, you're not a female, you're not any race, you're not any height, you're not born in any country or whatever. And you are going to, and it's before you're born. And then you had the ability to make the world however you wanted. My favorite way to put it, if you've ever played Dungeons and Dragons, it's the opposite of rolling a character. You don't roll your character and decide strengths and stamina and all that and decide to keep the character. No, you roll the world. Your character is born with whatever it's born with. Let's say you just so happen to have 15 strengths and 10 stamina and 5 intelligence or something. You don't know what world you're going to be born into. So, right, you need to decide the kind of world that you're going to be born into, right? So given that, I have it backwards. You don't know your personal characteristics. So you don't know strength 15. You don't know that. That's going to be random. You don't roll that at all. You can roll the world. So you can say, I'm going to have a world with feudalism. There's going to be a monarch and there's going to be 0.005 people that own things and run things and are rich. And then everyone else is a serf or a slave or whatever. I'm going to take out, because I like being the king. I like that small chance. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to create that type of world and just take my chances going into there. because I don't know my own properties when I get in. Maybe I'll luck out to be a king. Rawls says a rational, now remember we were talking about Immanuel Kant, rational, right? The reasoning about what the rational, not particularly self, the rational, what would the rational universalizable person do? He's saying that they would put same boundaries. If they were put in the original position, where they don't know their own properties and the world is going to be made, they would make a world that would have same boundaries. They wouldn't pick a world that had feudalism. They would pick an upper boundary, something with an upper boundary, lower boundary, an ability to, based off of work ethic and all that stuff, you can accelerate and all that stuff like that. They would allow you, the rational being would pick that. So I simplified that. Now, let me stop there. Anybody have any question about original position? All right, I'm gonna go for it. The difference principle, basically it says you can only have inequalities if everything that was based off of, that was arbitrary is used to help the least in society, the people who need the most. So a simple thing is if you come into, think of like the tax, estate tax. You come into billions of dollars, this is going to get taxed, and that money is going to get used for people who are the least, the people who need the help the most. A difference principle, we already do some form of it now, right? His would be, it would be applied a lot more, based off of Jon Rawls believes if you were a firstborn, you of a bunch of kids, just being that, you have a higher work ethic. So sociologists, psychologists said, oh, firstborns, they have a higher work ethic. That's not something that you did. That was something that happened to you. And that allows you to be more successful. That in and of itself is grounds for, if they're able to figure out something with a difference principle to take away something from you and give it to someone else, they would do it. So yeah, does anybody have any questions? All right, is my audio still working?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay, cool.
Yep, sounds good. Keep going.
All right,
Good stuff.
let's go. All right, let's move this, close this. Let's see. We did the difference principle. Let's get out of here. We are almost done. Let's go through Aristotle. So we've got one more, and this is virtue ethics. Aristotle. So this is the virtue. Hold on here. All right. All right. So the virtue ethics. Aristotle, political philosophy, two ideas. Justice is teleological. Defining rights requires us to figure out the telos, the purpose or essential nature of the social practice in question. The other side of it is justice is honorific. To reason about the telos of a practice, or to argue about what it is to reason or argue about what virtues it should honor or reward. Let's skip to the question. Suppose we are distributing flutes. The kind you play, right? We're distributing flutes. Who should get the best flutes? That's the question. What do people think?
Me, I've always wanted a great flute.
The best players.
Yeah, that's what Aristotle says. He's saying, so telos is purpose. Yeah. So he's saying, if you have a purpose if something has a purpose, if you can reason out a purpose, then morality has to do with that purpose. So flutes are meant to be played, and the best flute players who have demonstrated that they are the best, it should go to them. The alternative is it should go to the people who make the most money, or it should be distributed evenly, and the best flute players randomly might not get a flute, right? So that kind of thing.
Or it could go to the people who are learning flute, because if they don't have a good flute when they're learning, then they might, not want to play flute anymore.
Well, then you slipped in a purpose. You said that, true. Yeah. So you're like, oh, flutes are for learning, right? So instruments are, one part of it is for learning, one part of it is for mastery. And maybe it's a 50-50 distribution, or you may be saying it's all about the learning. So you like Aristotle at this point.
I had a hard time reading Aristotle, but yeah.
For this part. So I think the idea with all of these frameworks, remember originally it's you get posed with a hard moral dilemma or question, and then you reason about it with a group, and you go back and forth, you get to confusion and all these things like that. But this is a framework here for talking about virtue. Let's go ahead and skip Michael Sandel is talking about games. And if you were to have a game like golf, something like that, and someone just came in and they get those nice green jackets when they win everything. Someone said, oh, what do I have to do to win that? Oh, it's really hard. You probably got to play golf all your life. Well, why don't I just drop, let's say $1 billion, and I just get one of those green jackets and I just wear it in front of everyone and you put it on me, just like how you do with all the other golf masters. The golf association might say, well, I could use $1 billion. Let's do it. Let's say Bill Gates is now a winner of whatever the Masters or whatever it is, all of these open golf tournaments. He won. He's the best. Would we accept that he's the best? Most people would be no. And it's because he did not demonstrate that virtue. He should not be honored with that, because you can go into money corrupts it, what have you, any of that, but he did not demonstrate the virtue in order to receive that prize. So he should not be distributed. Going back to distributive justice, he should not be distributed. It should go to the person who demonstrates the capacity. So there's a purpose behind the game of golf and it is to see who's the best golf player. And you can really tease out a bunch of things with that one. Another one here, we'll go into it. Certain goods are appropriate to certain social institutions, and to ignore these goods in allocating roles can be a kind of corruption. Okay, so let's look at an institution here. Imagine a university that decided to auction 10% of the seats in the freshman class to the highest bidders. Would this system of admission be fair? What do you all think?
I guess it depends on what they do with. Well, I was going to say I guess it depends on what they do with the money, but I guess that's more thinking about the consequences than the fairness of the act, of the original act, right?
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, if you could, it depends on what the framework is.
If you depend on what you start to get the utilitarian. Right? Well, behind the scenes, I mean, in the book, he's like, hey, if you believe that a university is there to make money, that's the purpose of the university, then so this is what they should do. You should do it. Then you would be, Jeremy Bentham would be happy. Is there anyone else? Well, let's say the purpose, telos, Aristotle, if you were a university, a learning institution, and your purpose is to educate the populace. That's really what you're trying to do. It's not to maximize wealth. It's to educate the populace. Well, if you were to say, well, we're going to auction 10% of the seats in the freshman class. So that's going to be going to people who have the capacity to pay, and not towards the people who might need it, the education. They would maybe go against the purpose. And then that would be a reasoning that would violate an Aristotelian view if you like this framework. So there are certain things that I think you can tease out where all of these frameworks, you've got the Aristotelian. Let's go ahead and do a summary. And then let's pull into the cooperatives. We'll give a minute. So for cooperatives, when you're talking about fairness, my experience, people start out with utilitarianism and they think that the intuition is we're trying to maximize everyone's happiness. And we see somebody somewhere that's kind of exploiting everyone. And we want to say no to that person. And we want to distribute some more. But that, you have to realize that's the first stage. Like people within ethics, within philosophy, they really look down on utilitarianism. Even we couldn't even get the Constitution for the country from utilitarian. It had to be, we had to do some backflips just to get human rights in. So putting that in, then you're getting into like Jon Stewart Mill. He would still self-identify as utilitarian, but there's some backflips that happen in the book. He teases out that it's inconsistent. It's really not utilitarian. Jon Stewart Mill is really not utilitarian. You got libertarian, so it just starts from the beginning. Free rights, freedom, doesn't matter where it comes from. We just want it. So you have that. And then you have markets, Immanuel Kant, where you start getting into something, what I would say is rigorous. A framework for trying to there's some things we didn't talk about, but obligating. Kant is a contractarian too. Obligating people based off of rationality. You're still on the hook. Even if you say, I personally want XYZ, nope, you're still on the hook by virtue of being a rational being. You deny this duty of trying to reason about morality, you still have a problem under a Kant. So you have that, and then Rawls tries to make things a little bit more, he updates things for some of the problems you have with Kant, makes it easier for you to reason. You can come together and reason with people about what would the best system for the world be if you didn't have any properties yourself. And so that allows you to reason about things more, what you could say more fair. And then you got Aristotle.